Yes, in my research I located two Ross brothers who were two people who weren't named as an inscription on the Dardanup War Memorial. Mervyn Ross was the younger of the two brothers. He'd been working as a clerk in the Wellington Mills office when he enlisted for war. It would have been July 1915. So Mervyn wasn't quite 21 years of age, so legally he should not have enlisted, but he was 21 on the application form, and he enlisted in response to what he'd been reading about Gallipoli and the battles in general, and we weren't travelling all that well. And he trained at Black Boy Hill Camp at Greenmount. He then was sent to Egypt. They did training there in the desert sands with the flies, and it was pretty ordinary according to all the diaries we read. So Mervyn was allocated to the 32nd Battalion, which was a mix of South Australians and Western Australians. And after he'd gone through the pretty arduous training in Egypt, he was sent to the Western Front in France. The timing wasn't all that good for Mervyn, and early on they were ordered to participate in a battle that ended up being the worst 24 hours in Australian history, with 5,500 men killed and wounded in 24 hours. Unfortunately, Mervyn was one of the men who were killed, and tragically, to this day, his body hasn't been identified. We know he was on a German list of those 250 men buried in the mass grave at Fromelles that was only found in 2009. So till 2022, 173 of those 250 men have been positively identified. Mervyn still has not. A good story for Dardanup was that his mate Adolf Knabel, who we also added later onto the Dardanup War Memorial, was a good mate of the Ross brothers. Tragically, he was with Mervyn Ross in the 32nd Battalion. He was killed on the same day, and he went into the mass grave as well. The benefit for the Knabel family and Dardanup in general was that he has been positively identified, and I visited his grave a few years ago, and he's in a brand new cemetery purpose-built for these 250 men. It's the only new Commonwealth war grave facility built in the last 50 years, so they have a special place to be honoured, and I was really proud to stand in front of Adolf Knabel's grave, beautifully inscribed in his honour with a statement that his parents wanted to say. To photograph that and bring it back was really special. Now, one thing that has come out of this, there is a grave right next to Adolf Knabel with remains in it that says, "Here lies the remains of an Australian soldier." Both the Knabel and the Ross descendants are hoping beyond hope that one day DNA will prove that Mervyn Ross is next to his mate in that cemetery. I mean, that would be awesome, but we don't know. Yeah, Mervyn's older brother, James Robert, was 23 when he enlisted a few months after his younger brother, so that's a bit unusual that the young boy would fire off first. But James, obviously, he was driven by his younger brother's action and felt he's got to be part of this. Prior to enlisting, he was a locomotive fireman living in Wellington Mills. He was well known. He was a well-built gentleman at that time, bigger and heavier than the majority of them. So I imagine he would have been a good sight in a uniform, or a bit fearsome to the opposition. Anyway, their paths crossed. He also went to the Western Front after training in Black Boy Hill, and subsequently he lost his life as well at the Battle of Pozieres and Moquet Farm, which is also a horrendous part of Australians' army history, and his body's never been found as well. He's inscribed on the Villers-Bretonneux Memorial, which is very widely known to most Australians. And the sad part there is the parents, there'd already been a lot of tragedy and misadventure within the family, and now to lose two boys within 6 weeks of each other, both bodies never found, I can't imagine how awful that would be. So the one thing they didn't know, and their mother had said, I wonder if the boys cross paths. That would be her great wish. Sadly, what had happened, the brother, the surviving brother of the two boys, was given the medals and the death pennies, and what the rest of the family didn't know was that the younger, like Mervyn and James had crossed. James had kept a diary. The brother of the two soldiers inherited a box, but because he never spoke about his brothers to anybody, he never told the family he had a box. And that was passed down to his son, who never told anybody he had a box, until it came down to Ross Bidder, who's the great nephew, who should have been giving this talk, but he's very unwell. Now, when Ross's father died, he inherited this box in 2016. So he opened it, and there were the medals, the death pennies, which are really valuable.
We just pick it up from when you opened the box, 2 cents?
Yep.
So that's just really loud four-wheel drive. Yep, go for it.
So Ross Bidder opened this box and was blown away with the contents, which included the death pennies, the war service medals, and a diary. So when Ross opened the diary, James had written virtually a day-by-day record of his experience, from going to Perth, training, what it was like in Egypt. When he was on leave, he described the beautiful gardens and the treacherous locals, and it was, although it was brief, it left you in no doubt what he was experiencing. And right towards the end, there was a statement. I caught up with Brother Mervyn yesterday. 9 days later, Mervyn was dead. 6 weeks later, James was dead. So it's sad that his parents never got to know that the boys did meet up for a talk. But Ross, the great nephew, was ecstatic when he read that. That made all of his research and study and trying to prove DNA worthwhile, that these two boys did actually meet. No doubt they spoke for some time and had a big hug and wished each other the best, but sadly that wasn't the outcome. Yeah, before the war, James Ross, the father, and James did carry through the family for some generations. He was a foreman at Wellington Mills, and there's been a lot of work done. The Dardanup Collective here have been sensational with all of the research and history and heritage they've uncovered, and certainly the Ross were a conspicuous family in Wellington Mills, and unfortunately I don't know a great deal about how they travelled after losing the boys. I just know there's statements to say they were devastated, and the mother never recovered. So I think that's just a lesson, and people of today need to understand and allow for the fact that there was this demoralised loss that they suffered from, and some generations, like even through today, like Ross Bitter is suffering, that he can't have his great uncle's DNA proven because he knows his remains are buried there, but he wants to see a memorial inscription on a headstone saying that's James, or that's Mervyn in this case, yeah. Well, I think to military historians, the Anzac series of events announced Australia on the international stage. We had an incredible reputation for our bravery, our larrikinism, our lack of fear, which infiltrated all of the other Allied forces. The closest to us was the New Zealanders, and I guess that's appropriate, called the Anzacs. But I think the pain and suffering, I mean, I feel my grandfather's loss, and here am I, 70 odd years of age, and obviously, my son feels it a bit too, because when you look at the photographs and you think, wow, what an incredible life they had in front of them, and it was all taken away, and we often ask, what for? Because we continue to go into wars and loss of life, loss of youth. So I think my generation was probably fairly lucky. My marble did come out and I failed a medical for Vietnam, so maybe I dodged more than a bullet there, but certainly most others in my generation and to now have not really had all that much to worry about as far as action on your doorstep. And a lot of people don't understand how many bombing raids there were in Darwin, and the threat that Australia was under. I don't think that's ever really been appropriately published. The people of Dardanup should be extremely proud that with the enlistments in the First World War, Dardanup, Ferguson, Wellington Mills were very highly representative as a percentage of their population. In fact, one of the statistics that most people don't know is the Southwest enlistees were killed at the rate of 24%. So almost 1 in 4 of enlistees from the timber towns in and around Dardanup lost their lives, whereas the national average is 14%. So effectively, everyone who enlisted from this area in the end had a 10% more chance of losing their life. So everyone should just be extremely proud and acknowledge Dardanup and the Shire's contribution to the First World War.